The sentence landed softly, almost politely, and still it split something open inside me. Grandma, you're just too old for the kind of wedding I want. I remember the way the room went quiet after that, like the air itself had stepped back to watch what I would do next. I am 68 years old, and I have learned that silence can be louder than shouting. I smiled at my granddaughter Emily that afternoon, the same gentle smile I had worn through decades of PTA meetings, hospital corridors, and funeral parlors. I nodded, folded my hands in my lap, and said nothing. But something shifted in me, slow and certain, like a clock finally striking the hour it had been counting toward all along. I wasn't always the old woman people talk over. I was once a young wife named Margaret who learned to stretch a single paycheck until it almost sang. My husband Harold and I bought our first house with money saved in coffee cans, every bill carefully marked and filed in a drawer I still keep. When he died 12 years ago, the house grew quieter, but the habit stayed. I paid utilities on time, clipped coupons, balanced my checkbook down to the last cent. I learned how to be alone without becoming small. Emily came into my life like sunlight through a kitchen window. I babysat her when my daughter Linda went back to work, rocking her to sleep while the evening news murmured in the background. I paid for piano lessons when Linda said they were too expensive. I covered braces, summer camps, even part of college tuition, all documented with cashier's checks and neatly labeled receipts. No one asked me to do these things. I simply did them, because that is what love looked like to me. Over the years, I noticed how often I was consulted only after decisions had already been made. Family group texts buzzed with plans I was expected to support but not shape. I became the dependable background, the quiet yes, the extra wallet. When Emily got engaged, I was told last. When venues were toured, I wasn't invited. Still, I mailed a generous check the moment Linda hinted that weddings were so expensive these days. The day Emily told me I was too old, she said it with a soft laugh, as if age were a mild inconvenience like a wrinkle in a tablecloth. She talked about aesthetics, about how the guest list needed to feel young and vibrant. She avoided my eyes when she mentioned the ceremony would be child-free, then quickly added, "And, well, it's a long day." I knew. I had lived long days before. That evening, I drove home slowly, the radio off, listening to the turn signal click like a patient metronome. In my kitchen, I laid my purse on the table and took out the wedding contribution receipt I had tucked inside weeks earlier. I smoothed it flat, read the amount again, and placed it beside my utility bills and bank statements. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as dusk settled over the street. Neighbors walked dogs, porch lights flicked on, life continued in its ordinary, unremarkable way. Somewhere between the steam rising from my mug and the quiet ticking of the wall clock, I understood that being seen as old had given me something unexpected. It had given me freedom. I slept badly that night, not because of anger, but because my mind kept replaying her voice the way a song gets stuck in your head. The house was quiet in that deep, late silence Harold used to call the honest hours. I got up before dawn, padded into the kitchen, and stood at the sink with the faucet running too long, watching the water bead over my hands as if it could rinse off what I'd heard. In the pale light, I opened the drawer where I keep my papers. People tease me for it, but that drawer has carried me through widowhood. It holds my deed, my insurance, old tax returns, and every receipt that ever mattered to me. I pulled out the copy of the check I'd written for the wedding, one of those neat cashier's checks the bank prints on heavy paper, with my name spelled correctly and the amount stamped like a promise. I hadn't even written gift on the memo line. I wrote wedding. I always liked being clear. My phone buzzed while the tea kettle warmed. A family group text. Linda had sent a blurry photo of Emily in a white dress at some boutique, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Everyone replied with heart emojis and exclamation points. I stared at the picture for a long moment, letting myself remember the baby I'd rocked to sleep against my shoulder, the teenager who used to braid my hair just to practice. Then Linda's next message popped up. Mom, can you send another $1,500? The florist needs a deposit this week. It's all so stressful. It was almost comical, the way my heart did two opposite things at once. One part of me softened, because I knew stress. I knew how money tightens around you like a belt. Another part of me went still. Too old for the wedding, but not too old for the deposits. I didn't answer right away. I set my phone face down and ate a piece of toast I didn't taste. At 9, I drove to my branch of the bank, the one with the faint smell of carpet cleaner and a security guard who always nods like he remembers my name. I took a ticket and sat under a television playing muted morning news, watching the little number sign change. When my turn came, I spoke to a young teller with shiny nails and a polite smile. I asked for a printed history of my recent cashier's checks and transfers. She looked surprised, but she did it. I watched her hands move quickly over the keyboard, and I thought about how easily our lives become numbers on a screen. I left with a stapled stack of paper in my purse, the kind of thing no one notices until they need it. The sun was brighter by then, the day turning ordinary again, but inside me something remained sharp. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store. I moved slowly down the aisles, touching peaches, choosing bread. A woman in her 30s rushed past me with a cart full of party supplies. Her phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped. I wondered if she had someone like me at home, someone who kept the family afloat quietly, without being thanked. When I got back, there was a voicemail from Emily. Not a call, a voicemail. Her voice was cheerful, practiced. Grandma, hi. So, Mom said you might be able to help with a couple things. We're doing this really clean modern vibe, so it's important everything looks cohesive. Also, there's the bachelorette weekend. I know it's not your scene, obviously, but it's expensive, and I'm trying to keep it all together. Call me back. Obviously. I stood in my hallway with the phone in my hand, listening to the message twice, as if repetition would change the meaning. My cheeks felt warm, but my eyes didn't sting. That was the strange part. I wasn't crying. I was watching. For years, I had excused little things. The way Emily would hug me with one arm while checking her phone with the other. The way Linda would say, Mom, you don't mind, right? As if my agreement were automatic, like electricity that always comes on when you flip the switch. I told myself they were busy, young, overwhelmed. I told myself love doesn't need ceremony, but love does need respect. And that was what I could finally name, the missing ingredient. That afternoon, Linda stopped by with a folder. She breezed into my kitchen like she lived there, kissed my cheek, and opened the folder on my table. Contracts, invoices, a printed seating chart draft. I recognized the bold logos at the top of the pages. Catering, venue, rentals. The numbers sat on the paper like heavy stones. I'm so glad you're okay, she said quickly, not looking at me long enough to really check. Emily didn't mean anything by it, you know. She's just curating. It's her day. Curating, as if family were a display. She tapped the paper with her manicured finger. We're short on the final venue payment. If we pay by Friday, we avoid the late fee, and the photographer wants the second installment. I told them you'd probably help, because you always do. There it was, said out loud, almost proudly. You always do. I reached for the folder, not to agree, but to read. Linda's eyes flicked up, surprised, as if I'd broken script. You don't have to go through all that, she said. It's boring. I like boring, I answered, and my voice sounded steady even to me. Boring keeps the lights on. I turned pages slowly. The venue contract had a cancellation clause, lines of small print that made my eyes work harder. The caterer required confirmation numbers and signatures. There were dates, deadlines, amounts already paid. I noticed a line that listed responsible party and saw Linda's name, not Emily's. I noticed how many deposits had been paid with my money and how few were tied to any written acknowledgement that it was a gift. When I was younger, I might have felt guilty for noticing. Now, I only felt awake, the way you feel when you realize a door has been unlocked the whole time. Linda watched me, uneasy. Mom, are you okay? I could have said, your daughter told me I'm too old to sit in a church and watch her marry. I could have said, you let her say it. I could have said, do you even hear yourselves? Instead, I looked at my daughter, the same daughter I'd held when she was sick with fever, the same daughter I'd driven to her first day of work, and I saw how deeply she had gotten used to leaning on me without asking how my back felt. I'm okay, I told her. I'm thinking. Her mouth tightened. Well, think quickly. We don't have time for feelings right now. It wasn't cruel, exactly. It was worse. It was practical. After she left, the kitchen felt larger. I washed the mug she'd used, wiped the counter, and stood for a moment with my hands on the edge of the sink. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled by. A dog barked twice, then stopped. Life carried on. Indifferent. That evening, I took out my old address book, the paper one with the worn cover. I flipped to the tab labeled L, and I found a name I hadn't needed in years. Geraldine Price, attorney at law. Harold and I had used her once when a contractor tried to overcharge us for a roof job. She'd been firm, calm, and very hard to fool. My finger hovered over the number. I didn't dial yet. I wasn't ready to move, but I wanted to know what I could do, legally and cleanly, to make sure my generosity had boundaries. I wanted to understand what protection looked like when the people taking from you share your blood. Before bed, I listened again to Emily's voicemail. This time I didn't focus on the words. I focused on the tone, the assumption, the casual certainty that my role was to provide, not to be included. I deleted the message. Then I opened my calendar and wrote down the wedding date in neat ink, the same way I used to write doctor appointments for Harold. Not because I planned to attend, because I planned to remember. In the darkness, I lay on my side and stared at the ceiling, hearing the house settle around me. I thought about how easy it is to become useful, and how slowly that usefulness can erase you. I thought about my hands that had cooked thousands of meals, signed checks, held babies, closed caskets, cleaned up everyone else's messes. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt something like him beside me again. Not his body, not his voice, but his old steady belief in me. Margaret, he used to say, you don't have to be loud to be strong. In the morning, I would decide what strength looked like now. Tonight, I simply lay there, breathing evenly, letting the quiet hours tell me the truth. I had been generous, I had been patient, I had been kind, and I could still be all those things without being invisible. The next few days passed in a blur of routine tasks. The house, though familiar, felt slightly foreign. I moved through it like a ghost of myself, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I spent more time than usual at the kitchen table, sorting through receipts, statements, and contracts. The quiet hum of my old refrigerator and the tick of the clock in the corner were constant companions as I worked. In the evenings, I'd sit in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, staring out the window, lost in thought. I hadn't told anyone what I was planning, not Linda, not Emily, I'd learned long ago that some things need to be kept to yourself until the right moment. No one had earned the right to weigh in on my decisions, especially when they had no intention of truly listening. On the third evening after the phone call with Geraldine, I made my way to her office. The small brick building had always reminded me of a place where old promises were sealed and hard decisions made. Geraldine's office was just like I remembered it. Tidy, efficient, a faint scent of lavender mixed with coffee. She was sitting behind her desk, flipping through a thick folder of papers, when I walked in. "Margaret," she said, rising and offering her hand. "It's good to see you." I returned her handshake, feeling the firm pressure of her grip. There was something comforting about her confidence, the way she didn't need to say much to make you feel like everything was going to be okay. We sat down, and she motioned to the chair across from her. "So, tell me what's going on." I laid out the situation in as much detail as I could. How Emily had dismissed me, how Linda had never truly asked for my help, but simply assumed it. I told her about the constant stream of requests, the way my name was always the first one in the family budget when things got tight. It wasn't just the money, I explained. It was the way they treated me, as though my only role in their lives was to be a convenient source of support. Geraldine listened carefully, her expression neutral, but focused. When I was done, she didn't speak right away. She simply folded her hands on the desk and thought for a moment. "You've been too patient, Margaret," she said at last, her voice steady. "People don't always appreciate what they have until it's no longer available." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within me. It was true. I had spent so much time giving that I had forgotten what it meant to receive. But it wasn't just about the money or the favors anymore. It was about respect. The respect I hadn't received. The respect I was long overdue for. Geraldine leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. "You're right to want to make a change. But if you're going to do this, you need to be smart. This isn't about being angry, Margaret. It's about taking back control of your life. You've given enough. Now, it's time to make sure they understand the consequences of taking you for granted." I swallowed, a mixture of nerves and resolve settling in my stomach. I had never been one for confrontation. I was the one who kept the peace, who quietly supported, who put others first. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. "What do I need to do?" I asked quietly. Geraldine smiled, a rare thing for her, but there was no warmth in it. Only the satisfaction of someone who had seen this before and knew exactly how it would unfold. "We'll start with the paperwork," she said, opening one of the many folders on her desk. "You've got all the evidence you need. Contracts, payments, receipts. They've taken your money, and now we need to make sure they understand that it wasn't a gift." She slid the folder toward me, and I began to sift through the pages. There were details I hadn't fully processed before. How many times I had paid for things without a second thought. How little acknowledgement I'd received in return. It was all there in black and white, and as I looked at it, I felt the weight of it, the hours I had spent working to support their dreams, the sacrifices I had made. Geraldine explained the next steps carefully, outlining the legal actions I could take. It wasn't about suing them, she assured me. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to make sure they understood what it meant to take advantage of me, to make them see that I wasn't just some old woman who could be used for their convenience. "People like your daughter and granddaughter," she said with a knowing look. "They think they can get away with things like this because they assume you'll always be there, always willing to help, but you don't have to let them treat you like that. You've worked too hard, Margaret. You've earned the right to stand up for yourself." Her words, though blunt, felt like a balm to the wound I hadn't even realized was there. It wasn't about being selfish. It was about dignity. about reclaiming the respect I deserved. When I left Geraldine's office that day, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't relief exactly, but something close to it. I had a plan now, something concrete. I wasn't going to let them keep pushing me aside. I wasn't going to let them treat me as though I were just a footnote in their busy lives. That night, I sat down with my papers once more. I reviewed everything, every detail, every receipt. I knew I couldn't take back what had already been done, but I could make sure that, from this point forward, they would understand my value. I wasn't just going to be a silent benefactor anymore. I was going to make sure they saw me, saw the sacrifices I had made, saw the love I had given. I wasn't going to be invisible. And so, with a pen in hand, I began writing a letter to Linda and Emily. It wasn't a letter of anger, but it was one of clarity. I explained, calmly but firmly, how I had felt, how I had been taken for granted. I told them I could no longer be the silent figure in the background of their lives. I wasn't going to provide for their wedding, not in the way I had before. If they wanted my help, they would need to understand that respect came first. As I sealed the envelope, I felt the strangest sense of power. It wasn't a rush like some might expect. It was a quiet, steady feeling, like the calm after a storm. I had finally taken control. I had finally made a decision for myself. The next morning, I mailed the letter, and with it, I knew I had taken the first step towards something I hadn't had in a long time: peace. Peace with myself, peace with my family, and peace with the future. The morning after I sent the letter, I woke up earlier than usual. There was something different in the air, something crisp about the day, even though the sun hadn't fully risen yet. For the first time in a long while, I felt awake. Not the kind of awake you feel when you've had too much coffee, or when the day's responsibilities are pressing on you. This was a deeper kind of awareness, like I was seeing things clearly for the first time in years. I made my usual cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly as I looked out at the quiet street. The early morning light made everything seem softer, as though the world itself was giving me the space I needed to breathe. It was a strange contrast to the tightness in my chest the night before when I'd written the letter. I had expected to feel some sort of regret or second-guessing, but instead, I felt lighter. There was a small, quiet satisfaction in knowing that I had finally taken control. The phone call came around 10 a.m. It was Linda. "Mom, what is this?" she asked, her voice tight, a little more frantic than I was used to. There was a sharp edge to it, a sound of discomfort that didn't quite belong. I stayed quiet for a moment. I wasn't surprised she was calling, but I didn't rush to answer either. I wasn't sure how I wanted this conversation to go. "Did you send this letter?" she asked again, her voice more insistent now. I nodded to myself even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, I did." There was a pause. "You can't be serious," she finally said, a laugh in her tone, though it didn't sound like amusement. It sounded more like disbelief, as if she couldn't believe that her mother, the woman who had always been there for her, was drawing a line in the sand. "I am serious, Linda," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've given enough. It's time you both understood that." I could hear her pacing on the other end of the line, the sound of her shoes clicking against the floor. "You're talking about the wedding, aren't you? It's just a little bit of money, just a little bit of help. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I could feel the old tension rising in me, the familiar urge to back down, to apologize, to tell her it wasn't a big deal. But I stopped myself. No, this time was different. I was done being the quiet one, the one who simply accepted whatever came her way. "No, Linda, it's not about the money," I said, my voice firmer than I had expected it to be. "It's about respect. I'm tired of being treated like an afterthought. Like my contribution to this family doesn't matter. Her voice softened, though not entirely. Mom, I don't know what you want me to say. You know how expensive this wedding is. I can't do it alone. Emily is, well, she's focused on the details, and we just need your help, that's all. I could hear the guilt in her voice, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the years of her assuming that I would just always be there, always ready to help, always ready to sacrifice. I had spent so many years putting others first, but now, for the first time, I wasn't asking for anything from them. I was simply asking them to see me, to see what I had done for them, to understand the value of what I had given. I'm not saying you don't need help, I told her, my words slow, deliberate. But what I'm saying is that I've been giving for a long time, and it's not just about this wedding, it's about everything. Every time you needed something, and I was the one who came through. I'm not asking for gratitude, Linda. I'm asking for respect. There was another silence, this one longer than the first. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to find the right words, the right response. I wasn't going to give her the chance to smooth things over this time. I wasn't going to let her talk me out of it. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, Mom. But you have to understand, this wedding is everything to Emily. She's been planning it for years, and it's all about making sure everything's perfect. Perfection isn't the point, Linda, I said softly. It's about the people you're sharing it with. You and Emily may not see that right now, but I do. I know, she said, her voice small. I just don't know what to do now. We were counting on you. I know you were, I replied. But I can't be counted on if I'm invisible. If you want me in your life, Linda, you need to start seeing me again. Another pause. The silence this time was different. It wasn't filled with frustration or anger or guilt. It was filled with something else. Maybe understanding, maybe realization. I'll talk to Emily, Linda said finally. Maybe we can find another way. I'm sorry, Mom. I just didn't see it. I didn't respond immediately. There wasn't anything more to say. The conversation had shifted. The power dynamic had changed. For the first time, I wasn't the one who was expected to give. I was the one who had set a boundary, and that boundary had been respected. If only just. Okay, I said, my voice softer now. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. When I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step I hadn't taken before. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was walking toward something, not just away from something. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept myself busy, finishing a few household tasks and making dinner, but my mind kept returning to the conversation. It had gone better than I had expected, better than I had hoped. Linda hadn't reacted the way I thought she would. She hadn't yelled or accused me of being selfish. She had, for the first time in a long while, listened. By evening, I was beginning to realize that what I had done was more than just about the wedding. It was about reclaiming my own life, about making sure that the love I gave to my family wasn't taken for granted. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was showing them how to stand with me, not over me. The following days brought a strange sort of peace. Linda called once more, this time to tell me she and Emily had talked things over. They had decided to scale back a bit on the wedding plans and work within a budget they could both manage. I could hear the relief in her voice, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of gratitude. I didn't need to hear the words. I didn't need them to apologize. All I needed was for them to understand. And in that moment, I knew they did. I had done something, not just for them, but for myself. I had given myself the space to be seen. The days after that conversation with Linda were different. There was a stillness in the air, as though the world was waiting for me to adjust to the new reality I'd created. It wasn't a dramatic shift, not in the way you'd expect after a moment of confrontation. No, it was quieter than that. A change so subtle, so profound, that I had to learn to live with it, to breathe it in. I spent the next week in relative silence, the phone calls from Linda and Emily more sparse than usual. I didn't chase them. I didn't want to. I had learned a long time ago that people can only hear you when you stop begging them to listen. I knew that my annoyance, my refusal to engage as I once had, was a message in itself. It wasn't about punishment. It was about resetting the boundaries that had been neglected for far too long. In the evenings, I found myself revisiting old memories. The photo albums Harold and I had put together sat on the coffee table, gathering dust. I had always avoided looking through them. The old photos of us, the vacations, the milestones we had shared. It was too much, too raw, to dive into those memories. But now it felt like the right time. I opened the first album, the one with pictures from our early years together. There we were, so young and full of hope, standing beside a worn-out car in front of our first house. I could almost hear Harold's laughter in my mind, his voice so full of promise and possibility. Back then, we had so many dreams. We talked about the future, about growing old together, about children, grandchildren, and somewhere along the way, we had managed to make all those dreams real. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized something. The person I had been, the person I was before life, with its endless demands and sacrifices, had somehow gotten lost in the shuffle. I had become so absorbed in taking care of everyone else that I had forgotten to take care of myself. That night, as I sat in the living room surrounded by photographs of a life once shared, something shifted inside me. I didn't feel regret. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the life I had lived, for the strength I had found in myself, even when it seemed like everything around me was crumbling. And most importantly, I felt ready to move forward. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to wait for Linda or Emily to come to me. I was going to take control of my own life, my own happiness. I was going to start living for me again. I began by sorting through my things. The house had always been filled with clutter, the remnants of a life spent in service to others. Old receipts, unused items, papers from long-forgotten projects. It all had to go. I began to declutter, not just physically, but emotionally. I cleared out the drawers, the closets, the shelves that had collected dust, just as I had collected years of unnoticed sacrifices. With each item I discarded, I felt a little lighter. It was liberating, like I was shedding the weight of expectations, the invisible burdens I had carried for so long. There was something deeply cathartic about it. The house, once full of things I no longer needed, started to feel like it could breathe again. So did I. That afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. It had been a long time since I had done that, since I'd allowed myself to simply walk, to feel the sun on my face, to listen to the rhythm of the world around me. I walked at my own pace, stopping to admire the flowers in someone's garden, to greet a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't rushing to get anywhere. I was simply present. It was during that walk that I ran into Mary, a woman I had known for decades. We'd lost touch over the years, mostly because I had been too busy to maintain friendships. I had always put family first, and now I saw the consequences of that choice. But Mary was still here, still living in the same house, still working at the same bookstore she had when I first met her. She looked exactly the same, though there was something warmer in her eyes now, as if time had softened her. "Well, if it isn't Margaret," she said with a grin. I didn't expect to see you out and about. It's been ages. I smiled, feeling a bit self-conscious, but grateful for her warm reception. It has been a while, hasn't it? She nodded, looking me over with a mix of curiosity and concern. How have you been? Really been? I hesitated. I had always been good at deflecting personal questions, hiding behind a facade of being fighting, of being strong, but something about the way she asked made me stop. I've been better, I said, my voice steady but honest. I'm learning to take care of myself. It's been a long time coming. Mary raised an eyebrow. I'm glad to hear that. You've always been there for everyone else, Margaret. It's about time you did something for yourself. Her words felt like a validation, like someone had finally noticed the effort I had put into everyone else, even if they hadn't always appreciated it. It felt good to hear, but more than that, it felt empowering. For once, I wasn't being defined by my role as a mother, a grandmother, a caretaker. I was being defined by who I was, someone who had a right to live her own life, someone who could be just as important as the people I had spent my life looking after. We talked for a while, catching up on life, on the neighborhood, on things we had both missed. It was easy, the kind of conversation that made you feel like no time had passed at all. When we parted ways, Mary gave me a warm hug, one that felt real, unspoken, like we had both come to an understanding. Later that evening, as I sat down for dinner, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Mary. It had been the first real conversation I'd had in a long time, with someone who saw me as more than just a caretaker, more than just a background figure. She saw me as a person, as a friend, as someone worthy of attention. It was a small thing, but in that moment, it felt monumental. It wasn't that I needed everyone else to see me this way, but for the first time, I realized how important it was to see myself that way. The phone rang again that evening. It was Linda. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, she began, her voice softer than before. I've been talking to Emily and we realize maybe we didn't treat you the way we should have. We're sorry. The words felt strange coming from her, as if she were struggling to find the right ones. But I could tell she meant them. She wasn't asking for anything in return. She was simply acknowledging what I had been trying to tell her. I appreciate that, Linda, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not angry. I just want us all to understand that we're a family, not a transaction. I've given a lot over the years. But now, I need to give something to myself. There was silence on the other end, and then Linda spoke again. We understand, Mom. We really do, and we want to do better, for you. The conversation ended on a quieter note, one of mutual understanding. It wasn't the big dramatic resolution I had expected, but it was enough, more than enough. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict or brushing things under the rug. It was the kind of peace that comes from standing in your truth, from setting boundaries that protect your heart. It was the peace that comes from finally choosing yourself. And as I closed my eyes that night, I knew I had taken the first real step in reclaiming my life. Not just for them, but for me. The days that followed were different, but not in a way I could have expected. They were quieter, yes, but there was a certain softness to the quiet, a peace that had settled over me like the early morning mist, gentle but profound. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't rushing through my days. I wasn't always preparing for the next phone call, the next visit, the next favor. I was simply existing in the present, doing things that felt right in the moment, rather than because I felt obligated to. I started spending more time in the garden. Harold had always been the one who took care of the plants. I didn't have his patience for it. Or I hadn't back then. But now, with more time on my hands and a new sense of purpose, I found solace in pulling weeds, in pruning the roses, in watching the small flowers bloom and fade. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing something that didn't ask for anything in return, something that simply grew because it was meant to. One afternoon, as I was tending to the hydrangeas near the back fence, I heard the familiar sound of car tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron, and looked toward the driveway. Linda's car was parked there, and it wasn't just her. Emily was with her. I felt a small pang in my chest, not of anger, but of something else. It wasn't regret, but the recognition of what had been and what could never be again. I took a deep breath and walked to the door to greet them. "Mom, we need to talk," Linda said before I could even open my mouth. Her face was soft, but her eyes were tinged with something I couldn't quite read. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Of course, come in." We settled in the living room, and for the first time in a long while, it felt awkward. Emily, who usually carried herself with such confidence, seemed a little uncertain. Linda, too, wasn't quite her usual self-assured self. The air between us was thick with unspoken things, but there was a vulnerability there that I hadn't seen before. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said," Linda started, her voice quiet. "About how you felt, how we treated you." She glanced at Emily before continuing, her voice faltering slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't important, and I know I've leaned on you too much." I hadn't expected her to say this, not after everything. It took me a moment to collect my thoughts, to allow the words to sink in. "Linda, I'm not angry," I said finally, my voice steady. "I wasn't trying to make you feel guilty. I just needed to make you see what I've been carrying all these years. You've been so focused on the wedding, on your own lives, that you didn't realize I was disappearing into the background." Emily shifted in her seat. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting in her lap. There was an apology in her silence, but it was almost as if she didn't know how to voice it. I saw her youth in the way she hesitated, in the way her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She had always been the center of attention. Everyone had catered to her needs, her wants. But now, for the first time, she was learning something about what it meant to take responsibility for her actions. "Grandma," Emily said, her voice small, almost unsure. "I never meant to hurt you. I guess I didn't realize how much I was taking from you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had assumed that I was invisible to her, that she didn't care about my feelings. But now, sitting there, watching her struggle to find the right words, I realized that she had never truly understood the depth of my love for her, the sacrifices I had made, not because I wanted something in return, but because I loved her. But it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about being seen. "I know you didn't, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer now. "But love isn't just about giving. It's about respect. It's about being seen for who you are and not just what you can do for others." Emily's eyes glistened, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But instead, she blinked quickly, as though trying to hold back the emotion. "I didn't understand that," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd always be there. I thought you didn't mind." It was hard to hear, but I didn't look away. I needed her to understand what it meant to treat people with the respect they deserve, not just when it was convenient. "I've always been there, Emily. But you can't take someone for granted just because they've always been there. It's not fair, and I won't let you do it anymore." Linda and Emily both nodded, their faces solemn. There were no excuses, no more words to fill the silence. There was just the weight of everything that had been left unsaid, and finally, the understanding that had been missing. The conversation was long, but not as difficult as I had expected. They weren't defensive. They weren't angry. They were simply sorry. And in that moment, I realized that this was the kind of apology I had needed, the kind of change I had been waiting for. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It was about real change, about the quiet recognition of what had been broken and what needed to be mended. When they left, after a long, quiet hug that felt more meaningful than any I had received in years, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them drive away. I wasn't sure what the future would hold. I didn't know if things would ever return to the way they once were. But I wasn't afraid anymore. As I stood there, the weight of the past seemed to lift a little more. I had made my stand, and they had heard me. They had seen me. That evening, as I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, I thought about the years of giving, of sacrifices made, of love given without question. But I also thought about what I had gained in return: strength, independence, and the courage to speak up when it mattered. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the supporting character in someone else's life. I felt like the lead in my own. I had done the hard thing. I had put my foot down. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my place in their lives, but had also given them the opportunity to see me for who I was. Not just the mother, not just the grandmother, but a person in my own right. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my own life again, and it was enough. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden. I smiled softly to myself, knowing that, finally, things were different. Not perfect, not easy, but different. And that, in itself, was a victory. The days after our conversation hung in the air like a soft, lingering note. There wasn't an immediate rush of change or grand gestures, but something deep inside me had shifted. It wasn't just about the apology, though that was important. It was about how things had subtly but unmistakably started to fall into place. For the first time in years, I could see the potential for something more, something deeper than what I had accepted for so long. I woke up one morning to find the sun already creeping through the curtains, the light touching the corners of the room in the way it used to when Harold was still here. It was still too early, too quiet, but the stillness didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a pause before something meaningful, something real. I made my way into the kitchen, where the scent of coffee filled the air. I had gotten into the habit of waking early to enjoy these small moments that didn't involve anyone else's needs, no one else's demands. It was time for me, something I hadn't truly given myself in so long that it almost felt foreign. Yet now, with each passing day, it became more comfortable, more natural. I poured my coffee and took it to the small table by the window. The sunlight had already started to warm the room. I sat there for a while, sipping slowly, watching as the world outside came to life. It was a simple, ordinary moment, but there was a peace in it, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. As the days went on, I found myself doing more for myself. I took walks, longer ones now, up to the old park where I used to walk with Harold. The path was familiar, but I walked it alone now, and there was something empowering about that. The air smelled different here, somehow fresher, as if the world itself had begun to change with me. I began to reclaim small pieces of myself that had been buried under years of caregiving. I started playing the piano again, not the way I used to when the house was full of children and laughter, but quietly, just for me. I didn't need to play perfectly, didn't need to impress anyone. I just needed the release that came with the simple act of music. I played softly, a song Harold had loved, letting my fingers remember the melody as I let go of all the years that had felt like a sacrifice. The most significant change, however, was in how I saw my relationship with Linda and Emily. After that conversation, things hadn't returned to normal immediately. There was no instant resolution, no perfect understanding. But there was a subtle shift. Linda had become more aware of the space I had claimed for myself. She didn't call as often, but when she did, the conversations were different. There was a gentleness there, a newfound respect. She didn't treat me like the solution to every problem anymore, and I noticed how our talks had become more balanced. We spoke about our lives, her work, her plans, and she asked how I was, really asked, instead of just moving forward with her own agenda. Emily had started calling more too. At first, it was awkward. She didn't know what to say, how to bridge the gap between what we had been and what we were becoming. But I appreciated the effort. Slowly, we began to talk, not just about the wedding, but about her life, about how she was feeling, about her dreams and fears. There was a raw honesty in her voice now, a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. She had grown up not just in age, but in maturity. It was strange hearing it from her. I wasn't used to seeing her as an adult, but there it was, this woman, not the girl who had been so consumed with herself, but someone who was learning the weight of responsibility and the impact of her actions. But as much as I saw them changing, I knew I was changing too. I wasn't the same woman I had been before I put my foot down, before I finally let myself be heard. And yet, I felt a sense of liberation that I had never known before. I had spent my whole life accommodating, yielding, and, in doing so, I had lost myself. But now, I was finding myself again. The quiet moments, the simple acts, the small steps toward reclaiming my own life, they all added up. One afternoon, Linda came by with a bouquet of flowers. She had always been one to bring flowers for any occasion, but this time it felt different. She handed me the bouquet, a soft smile on her face, and I could see in her eyes the understanding we had reached, the reconciliation of sorts. "I wanted to bring these," she said, her voice warm but tinged with the sincerity I hadn't heard from her before. "For everything, for all of it, I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've taken you for granted." I didn't know what to say at first. It wasn't a grand apology, but it didn't need to be. It was the right kind of apology, the kind that acknowledged what had been but didn't dwell in it, the kind that looked forward. "Thank you, Linda," I said softly, the words carrying more weight than I expected. "That means more to me than you know." She nodded, looking at me with a softness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. She didn't stay long, but the time she did spend felt like the beginning of something new. Not perfect, but new. That evening, as I sat on the porch with my tea, watching the stars slowly appear in the darkening sky, I felt a quiet joy. I wasn't waiting for something to happen anymore. I wasn't chasing anything. For the first time in a long time, I was simply being. And as the days turned into weeks, the peace I had found continued to settle around me like a blanket, warm and comforting. There were still challenges, of course. Life didn't suddenly become effortless just because I had learned to assert myself. But now, I faced those challenges with a clarity I hadn't had before. I didn't need approval. I didn't need to prove anything. I had already proven my worth to them, to myself, and that was enough. One afternoon, while I was sitting at the kitchen table with my tea, I received a letter from Emily. It was unexpected. She hadn't written to me like this before, not in years. The envelope was simple, no return address, just her handwriting. My heart beat a little faster as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. I had learned not to expect anything from her. But now, with this letter in my hands, I felt the weight of our unspoken history. I unfolded the letter slowly and began to read. "Dear Grandma, I don't know where to start, but I need you to know something. I'm sorry for all the times I took you for granted, for the times I assumed you would always be there to make everything better. I never realized how much you gave up for us, how much you sacrificed just to make sure we were okay. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what you said, about how I never really saw you. I'm sorry for that. I don't want you to feel like you're invisible anymore, like you don't matter. Because you do. You matter more than I ever gave you credit for. I want to do better. For you. I'm learning to be a better person, a better granddaughter. And I hope one day I can make it up to you. I love you, Grandma. Emily. I put the letter down slowly, my eyes lingering on the words. There was so much said in so few sentences, so much more than I had ever expected from her. It wasn't a perfect apology, and it wasn't the end of our journey. But it was enough. It was a start, a genuine one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where I kept the things that mattered most. It wasn't just the words. It was the intent, the recognition that we had reached a new understanding, a new beginning. As the days went by, I felt myself coming more alive, like a plant stretching toward the sun. I was finally taking root in my own life, and for the first time in many years, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. I was more than enough just as I was, and for the first time, I truly believed it. Life had begun to feel quieter in a way that was both comforting and foreign. I spent more time focusing on the small joys, the scent of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, the softness of the morning light as it filtered through the curtains. Time no longer felt like something I had to race against. It simply was, and I was finally allowing myself to be part of it. Linda and Emily were different now, not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that made the future feel more hopeful. They had started to reach out more, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. They asked about my day, listened without rushing, and didn't always expect something in return. And I found that I didn't mind giving anymore, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. One afternoon, as I sat in my favorite armchair with a book in my lap, I heard a knock on the door. It was a sound I hadn't expected, and when I opened it, there stood Emily, holding a small box wrapped in simple paper. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly, her eyes a little nervous, as though unsure of how I would receive her gesture. I smiled, surprised and touched. "What's this?" I asked, gesturing toward the box. She held it out, her hand shaking slightly. I wanted to give you something, for everything, for being there for me, even when I didn't deserve it." I took the box from her, carefully unwrapping it. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a delicate silver locket. I opened it to find a picture of the two of us, one of those old photos from when she was a little girl, and I was holding her in my arms, smiling down at her. "I thought," she continued, her voice quiet but sincere, "you could wear it to remind you that you matter, that I see you now, and I love you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, I hugged her, the warmth of her gesture settling in my chest. It wasn't the gift itself, but the thought behind it. It was the recognition, the acknowledgement of everything that had been and everything we were becoming. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I love you too." As she left, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, deeper than I had known before. The past was behind us, but the future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to walk into it with my head held high. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet kind of joy, the kind that comes with healing, slow but steady. My relationship with Linda and Emily had blossomed in unexpected ways. We talked more, not about obligations or expectations, but about our lives, our hopes, and our fears. I saw them for who they truly were, not just as my daughter and granddaughter, but as individuals learning, growing, and making their own way in the world. And in turn, they began to see me, not as the woman who had always been there to pick up the pieces, but as someone with her own story, her own dreams, her own worth. It was a different kind of love that was growing between us, one that was rooted not in duty, but in mutual respect. One morning, as I sat by the window sipping my tea, I reflected on how far we had come. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full in a way I hadn't known in years. There was space now, for me, for my own thoughts and desires. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. Then, one afternoon, Linda came over unexpectedly. She had that familiar look in her eyes, the one that used to make me brace myself for another request or expectation. But this time, she didn't have any of that. "Mom," she began, sitting down across from me, "I've been thinking. I want to take a step back. Not just in the wedding plans, but in everything. I've realized I've been asking too much of you, and I don't want that anymore." Her words, though simple, hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the weight of her admission, the vulnerability in her voice. "I want to find a way to make sure you're not always carrying the burden, Mom," she continued. "You've done enough, and you deserve more." I didn't know what to say at first. I just looked at her, seeing her in a new light. It wasn't about me being perfect. It was about her finally understanding that love wasn't a transaction. It was a choice. And she was choosing to see me. "Thank you, Linda," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." It was the beginning of something new, a new chapter for us, one where I didn't have to shrink myself to make room for others, one where I could stand tall, proud of what I had done, and hopeful for what was still to come. The days drifted by, each one a quiet testament to the changes that had unfolded in the last few months. My life, once shaped by the needs of others, had slowly begun to shape itself around me. I could feel the shift in the air, in the space I had created for myself. It wasn't a loud transformation, but it was deep, subtle, and more profound than I could have imagined. The relationship with Linda and Emily had transformed too. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had begun to understand what I had always hoped they would, that love isn't just about what you give, but about how you are seen and valued. I no longer felt like the invisible woman in the background of their lives. I was a part of their world, and they were finally a part of mine. One afternoon, Linda called, her voice soft but full of something I hadn't heard in a long time: sincerity. "Mom," she said, "we've been talking, Emily and we both want to thank you for everything, for your patience, your love, and for teaching us what it means to truly give and receive. We've learned so much from you. We're sorry it took us this long." I felt a warmth spread through me, a kind of peace I had longed for but didn't expect to find. It wasn't about the apology. It was about the realization that they had finally seen me, not just as their mother or grandmother, but as a woman with her own voice, her own strength, her own worth. "I love you both," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've always loved you, and I'm proud of who you've become." That night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear sky. The quiet of the evening felt like a soft embrace. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally learned to accept myself as I was, flaws, scars, and all. And in doing so, I had allowed myself the freedom to live without expectation. As I sat there, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the moments of self-doubt, the years of giving without asking for anything in return, but also the strength I had found in standing up for myself, in demanding the respect I deserved. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And I had done it. I smiled to myself, knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I was truly living, not for anyone else, but for me. And that, I realized, was the most powerful form of love there was. If you were in my place, what would you have done? If you found yourself standing up for what you truly deserve, how would you reclaim your peace? Thank you for being with me on this journey. If you found even a small piece of yourself in these words, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Your story matters too.